Hello and welcome to the Make Your Voice Count Google Plus Hangout series organized by the United Nations Human Rights Office. Today in this third Hangout we will discuss how to ensure meaningful participation of minorities. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is and activists from different parts of the world who work to promote human rights of minorities. I will let them introduce themselves. Let's start with Rita.
Hi everyone, my name is Rita Izsák and I am the United Nations Independent Expert on Minority Issues, and I'm joining you today from Budapest, Hungary.
Thank you, Rita. And also with us we have Gitte.
Hi everyone, this is Gitte from the International Dalit Solidarity Network. I'm the UN Program Officer here and I'm joining you from Copenhagen, Denmark.
Thank you very much, Gitte, and welcome. Then we move to Leonardo, who's joining us from Colombia. Unfortunately, we do not have a video connection working, but we are pleased to have him with us, at least by audio. Leonardo.
Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation once again. It's a pleasure to join you. And yes, I'm in Bogota, Colombia right now, and I work with the Afro-Latinos project throughout Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you very much and welcome. And last but not least, we have Charlie joining us from Uganda. Charlie, please introduce yourself. So we seem to have a connection problem between Geneva and Uganda, so we will come back to her as soon as that problem is sorted out. And also, in addition to our participants in this panel, we have a worldwide audience watching this Hangout live on the United Nations Human Rights Google Plus page and its YouTube channel. And many of you have sent questions and shared views through different social media platforms. Thank you for those comments. And during this Hangout, you can still continue to tweet us questions using the hashtag #VoiceCount or minorities. Today's Hangout is really timely in the sense that this month we are actually celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Minority Declaration, or to spell it out, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National or Ethnic, Religious and Linguistic Minorities. And just last week here in Geneva, we had the annual session of the United Nations Forum on Minority Issues with hundreds of participants, minority representatives and governments and experts from different corners of the world. Now, Rita, one of the issues addressed at the Forum on Minority Issues is exactly participation of minorities. Could you share with us some of the key ways to ensure participation of minorities?
Yes, thank you. Actually, as you say, the second and the third sessions of the Minority Forum in the past have been dedicated to the issue of participation, which is key in ensuring minority rights protection. But I think we need to say that there are two important and equally important issues here. One is that what are the institutions that work for minority rights? And the second question is who are the people who work in these institutions? If I may encourage you to read my report, which I sent to the General Assembly this year to New York, it actually discussed the importance of having institutional attention dedicated to minority rights, so that there are governmental departments or even ministries or ombudsperson's offices or national human rights institutions that deal with minorities. And they are sufficiently and efficiently resourced. They have the capacity, the authority, and the coordinating role to ensure that minorities are integrated into their society. But as you say, a key question is who are the people who work there and whether minorities themselves are represented in these institutions. And I must agree, this is key. I many times get the question from governments and even business owners, like, I want to employ minorities, but how can I do it? What are the practical ways doing it? And usually I give them some advices, but the basic thing is that this is really easy to do in practice. If you want to attract minority representatives, then do so and say it in your call for vocations, for example. State that minority representatives are particularly encouraged to apply. In this way, they know that this is a friendly environment. This is somewhere where their voices will be heard, and they will be more likely to join such an organization. Another way is to have an internship or a fellowship program where you invite minority representatives. And if they prove to be good and if they contribute to the work of your organization, then you can keep them and give them a contract and employ them in the future on a long-term basis. These are very practical issues, and many times I feel that people are afraid doing that and trying this, but they are really easy steps to take towards the integration of minorities in organizations.
Thank you very much, Rita, for these very concrete proposals and suggestions. Now let's discuss how these type of suggestions are actually implemented on the ground. And I would like to ask Leonardo to tell us a little bit about the efforts to empower Afro-descendants in Latin America and the Caribbean to make sure that they can effectively participate in public life.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, there is a need to transform the public perception of Afro-Latinos through changes in the formal education curriculum and the media system as well, to incorporate an accurate history that includes the crucial socioeconomic, political, and cultural contribution of Afro-Latinos to the region. In countries, for example, like Colombia, where I am right now, for example, Afro-descendant women have the right to have quotas at the public institutions level, but how many of those women are Afro-descendants? Only 0.001% or sometimes less. So legislation has not been sufficient. Legislation is very important, but it's insufficient. We're proposing several strategies or ways to encourage or to promote participation of Afro-Latinos at all levels. And among these strategies, one of the most important ones is to strengthen Afro-descendant networks and their partnership with key institutions like the UN, for example, in order to design and implement inclusion projects and programs. It is also very important for us to encourage governments at all levels to face all these structural problems that we have: unemployment, poverty, social and political exclusion, gender discrimination, and institutionalized racism, which is one of the cruelest problems that we face, actually. And we need to integrate all strategies, partnerships, and initiatives, including the media, the mass media, and universities, to secure a big labor force of Afro-Latinos with a high education level. There is still much to be done in order to secure and to ensure participation of Afro-Latinos, but we are on the right track, and we need the UN to support us throughout this process.
Thank you very much, Leonardo. And before moving on, I would like to welcome Jolly. We managed to sort out the connection problem there, and would like to ask Jolly to introduce herself briefly.
Thank you. I'm Kemigabo. I work as the Africa Regional Manager for Minority Rights Group. I'm joining you from Kampala, Uganda. Thank you.
Welcome. Now, as was noted by the previous speakers, it is clear that participation of minorities in decision-making is not only a human right in itself, but it's also an important catalyst for the implementation of other human rights of persons belonging to minorities, ranging from rights within the educational field to language rights, and also to ensure non-discrimination. And we received quite a number of tweets and comments pointing out that the exclusion of minorities is still a reality in many countries. Gitte, could you tell us the experience that you have had in working with the Dalit communities, and perhaps also explore a bit how we reach out to the most marginalized and excluded communities, including minority children and women, and empower them so that they know, demand, and are able to defend their rights?
Yes, thank you, Antti. as you say, implementation is key to the realization of human rights. Indeed, the exclusion is affecting many marginalized communities around the world. Every day we receive reports on assaults and attacks against Dalits and other persons affected by caste discrimination, which describes the extreme discrimination, violence, even gang rape of Dalit women who are considered untouchable and polluting to the rest of society. And the fact that this still exists in the 21st century is something that we find is a scourge of humanity. Now, some governments have not yet fully recognized that this is a domestic issue. However, other governments have enacted model legislation. In our organization, the International Dalit Solidarity Network, we reiterate the need for implementation of existing laws, but also the need for enacting specific laws to promote and protect Dalit rights, and also to bring out the role of national institutions, as Rita mentioned in her intervention, is very important. There are many good examples of how participation and inclusion of minorities and excluded communities like the Dalits can be promoted. Now, let me give you one example from India. A week and a half ago, a very big demonstration was made in New Delhi by thousands of Dalit activists and activists from the indigenous tribal background to demand better enforcement of the law that criminalizes caste-based discrimination and untouchability in India. This was the result of a 3-year campaign, and at this event the Minister for Social Justice came and made a commitment to make these amendments. So this simply shows the strength of mobilization, of coalition building, and of working together and inviting the responsible parties of government to a constructive dialogue. And also in Nepal, we see efforts to include Dalit rights in the new constitution. And in Bangladesh and Pakistan, there are national Dalit movements which are growing in confidence and also ensuring more recognition. And let me sort of finally speak on the role of the UN in addressing caste-based discrimination and also make some concrete suggestions. 3 years ago, the UN High Commission of Human Rights in Navi Pillay made a very forceful statement saying that caste is a negation of the very principles of equality and non-discrimination. And now to follow up on her leadership, we urge the UN to promote recognition of this, something which we still feel is lacking in some countries and also in the international community. So a first suggestion is to have the UN system as a whole to address caste discrimination, to include it in the UN language, to include it on par with other prohibited grounds of discrimination, and also to include it in the guidance which is being prepared for the UN efforts to address protection of minorities and racial discrimination, and in the post-2015 development framework, which is also being discussed at the moment. Secondly, we urge the UN member states to address this issue in the Human Rights Council, to take it up specifically as a thematic concern and to promote a draft framework which has been prepared by the UN itself to promote recognition of the issue and to help governments enact laws and legislation to address this issue. And then finally, I want to make a call right here actually to all the UN special procedures to take this up perhaps in a joint statement, maybe under the leadership of Ms. Izsák, to recognize that caste discrimination is in violation of human rights law, to also welcome progress made, but also to note out the challenges still remaining. This would be a very much needed push for the inclusion of this issue also on the international agenda.
Thank you very much, Gitte, and thank you for pointing out challenges and also highlighting some good practices that there exist. Now, just to recall that this Google Plus Hangout series is part of the Make Your Voice Count social media campaign for Human Rights Day 2012. And the theme is about inclusion and the right to participate in public life. And clearly, this Google Plus Hangout and other social media initiatives are also one way to facilitate participation, including that of minorities. Now, let's move to the situation in Africa, and I would like to ask Charlie to tell us a bit about her experience in working on minority issues, advancing minority participation there. Charlie.
Thank you, Antti. When we talk of the issue of participation and inclusion of minorities in Africa, what comes in mind is the issue of representativeness, which is linked to the issue of political power that is also linked to development. And being an ethnic minority in Africa often translates into marginalization of all levels, socially, economically, and politically. And the fact that ethnic minorities do not participate as a marginalized constituents, especially when it comes to elections, even in countries where we have now positive constitutions, it even makes it harder for them to bargain or influence the decision-making, which in the long run encourages the exclusion and discourages the participation at all levels of minorities. And one of the major things, I think, as far as the East African region is concerned, where much of my experience is coming from, is the issue of lack of recognition from the states, because this kind of translates into each and every level of marginalization. Most of the minorities are not constitutionally recognized, and as a result, it's very hard for them to secure representation in decision making. I'll give an example from Kenya, one of the communities we work with, the Nubian Kenya community. In spite of the Nubians who have lived in Kenya for almost a century now, they are still being denied citizenship, and they cannot get birth certificates, they cannot get passports, and all this has translated into their levels of unemployment, has translated into the literacy levels of the Nubian community in Kenya. And maybe what I can say is, over time, especially from the East African region, things are changing quite positively, I must say, but which makes it a challenge for civil society organizations and the different players like the UN agencies to take advantage of the space that is coming up. And with that, I would like to mention some of the opportunities that are available within the region now that the minorities and minority activists can take advantage of. One of them is the regional and the national legal frameworks that are coming up. Kenya has a new constitution that, if you look at it compared to the previous constitutions they have, it has embraced minorities and has brought them on board. Uganda's constitution is one of, I think, the beautiful documents we have in the region, but the challenge is the enforcement of the laws. Tanzania currently is going through the reform processes, and if civil society organizations, if the minority activists can take advantage of those spaces, I think they can realize into increased participation of minorities, and at the same time including minorities at different levels, decision making, and improving their livelihoods. I would also like to make mention of one area that has been mentioned by the previous speakers, the area of taking the voices of minorities across and beyond borders. And we are seeing this through the role of media, where, like, when we speak, if we don't have space at national level, but if we get space and expose the issues that are affecting the minorities in different countries, governments sometimes are scared of shame, that sometimes out of that international pressure, they kind of act. So it is important for the minorities to take advantage of the space and make use of the media, especially currently. We have a good example of how the media has played this through the use of networks in Tanzania, where an investor recently was about to take over the land of the Husager, one of the minority communities in Tanzania. But because of the use of the media and because of the use of power networks and advocacy, this was turned the other way around, and the community was able to secure their land. So I'm looking at that as one of the ways or avenues where minority participation can be improved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And I think your comments tie in very well with some of the questions that have been coming in through Twitter. We have one question from Canada, from Errol Mendes, and he's asking for more constitutional protection for minorities. And he's saying that diversity must become a state ideology. Now, you refer to the constitutional provisions in Africa, and earlier speakers also mentioned that. And maybe we could have a couple of comments on the importance of including minorities in the constitution making, both in the process and reflecting the diversity in the actual content of constitutions, something that we in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have also worked on. Maybe I could bring in Rita to comment briefly on that issue.
Hi, well, thank you. As we said, it's very important to have minority rights protection standards included into legislation, and of course it starts with the Constitution. But what we also talk today about is the implementation of these laws. We have seen a lot of constitutions that are brilliantly written, but then there is a gap when it comes to implementation, and this is why I mentioned the importance of having institutions dealing with minority rights, which can ensure that there is really sufficient attention on how these groups should be helped and assisted in the future. And one thing which, if I may say, that one of the reasons why we work in the UN human rights system as special procedure mandate holders and experts is that we are trying to produce documents that minorities themselves can use. And as I mentioned, we already produced, my mandate has produced a set of recommendations when it comes to the right to education, participation in public, social, cultural rights, or the specific situation and challenges of women, or the last time I produced this report about institutional attention in the past, or about conflict prevention, or MDGs. My key message would be, if I may say, as a part of conclusion as we are coming to the end, is that I would like to encourage all minorities themselves to use these documents. We are producing it to have something in your hand. And when we talk about participation in parliament, in government, or in local bodies, it shouldn't depend on the goodwill of these authorities. It's not just a chance to have these minorities included. It's a must. It's a right that minorities can claim, and it's an obligation of these stakeholders to include minorities. So I would like to encourage all of us, minorities and non-minorities, solidarity workers, to use these documents that we are producing, because they are globally, they are meant to be used globally in all these regions and countries. And we just had a meeting in Doha, in Qatar, about how after the Arab Spring, the North African and the Middle East countries should include minority rights protection into their constitutional legislation. And I do hope that these documents will be used and that we can contribute to these processes in a positive way.
Thank you very much, Rita. We have time for to take one more question, and that is a question put by Jessica Ruiz, and she's asking, why don't people fight for the minority? And it's a simple but very powerful question. I would like to get a very quick reply from our participants, and maybe in particular giving a message as to how to involve majorities in each country to get more engaged in these issues and in the inclusion of minorities in decision making. Gitte, maybe you could go first.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is an important question. I think actually a lot is being done in many countries, first of all by minority representatives themselves. But the whole discourse, human rights discourse, needs to be inclusive. This is what we are saying today, and often some of the groups, such as the Dalits, are being marginalized in the discourse, and sometimes it's a lack of political will by governments to address this. And sometimes also lack of awareness. Now, when we speak with policymakers, for instance, and explain about the consequences of caste discrimination and the nature and the scope, many are simply unaware and are quite shocked to hear that this is taking place today. Slavery-like conditions affecting an estimated 260 million people around the world. Now, you need to have this part of the discourse, which is why my message is also to the UN to play a leading role in addressing issues of the most marginalized. And what we found also with regard to the previous question is that although there are constitutional rights, explicit legislation is needed, and it is necessary to explicitly address the rights of those marginalized you want to reach and target. Otherwise, they simply fall out of the purview, not only in development assistance, but also in humanitarian assistance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gitte. And then I would like to ask Leonardo to address the same question from the perspective of his work on Afro-descendants.
Yes, well, I think that, as I said, despite national, regional, and international mechanisms that defend Afro-descendants as a vulnerable group, in Latin America and the Caribbean, new generations continue being educated under the influence of education systems that reproduce racial stereotypes and prejudices against Afro-Latinos and Afro-Caribbeans. For example, there have been many cases of Afro-Latino girls who have been victims of gender and racial discrimination in their schools. Their own classmates and teachers, even teachers, insult them by using racist expressions. So I think the education system is one of the tools, or should be one of the tools, to address these issues and to help overcome the problems that affect Afro-Latinos and Afro-Caribbeans in general. Again, legislation is not enough. Our legislation is really good, is beautiful, but it's not enough. You really need to encourage all people, all societies, in order to help overcome these problems. Otherwise, the struggle will keep, being weak. We need to strengthen the struggle by inviting all societies, all people in the nations to support us. Otherwise, it's impossible to succeed.
Thank you, Leonardo. Charlie, how to engage the entire society to work to promote minority rights?
I think I'll say this from the different approaches we have used as far as working with minorities is concerned. I think what I would argue might be the different organizations actually working with minorities is to promote programs that engage both communities, the dominant and the minorities, the dominant communities and the minorities, because I think sometimes the approach is different. We tend to deal with the minorities, looking at them as a vulnerable group, and in the long run, we increase the distance between the two communities. So sometimes embracing programs that can bring the different groups together, help them to appreciate each other's cultures and ways of living, also helps to make the dominant group appreciate that the minorities are equal as the other tribes or groups or ethnic groups they're working with, and they deserve to be treated as human beings. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Charlie. Rita, very briefly, please.
Well, I think I reflected on most of the questions that have been raised, and I just like to use maybe this last remark on welcoming this initiative of having such a discussion, and to hope that it will be continued in the future. And if I may use this opportunity to call your kind attention to the fact that I do have I'm on social media. I do have a Facebook site and I have a Twitter site, and I'd like all of you to come and talk to me, because I can only do my work well if you tell me what I should be doing. So I'd like to thank for everybody who also joined us today, and I would like to ask you to continue talking to me so that I can base my work on your wishes and views and requests on how to improve your situation.
Thank you very much, Rita, and thank you all for these rich comments, which I think demonstrated that we have we have good tools and standards to advance minority rights, but in reality, the gap between the standards and the implementation is still wide in many areas, and that we need to work together to ensure that democracy is seen not merely as a rigid majority rule, but that it also involves strong protection for minorities, including their right to take part in decision making. I think your comments and examples of good practice will inspire us to do more in this respect. And I would also like to thank everyone who contributed through tweets and other platforms. This Hangout will be posted afterwards on YouTube, and let's keep the conversation going. Make your voice count for human rights. And don't miss the last component of our Make Your Voice Count Google Plus Hangout series. A hangout with the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Navi Pillay, will take place on Human Rights Day next Monday, 10th of December at 3:30 Central European Time. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google Plus. Search for United Nations Human Rights or the hashtag VoiceCount. Thank you and have a great day.